So this week we'll be talking about chapters 8 and 9. We're going to be talking about right now Virginia Satir. She was someone who was big in experiential family therapies. And we're going to talk about some of her theory uh, and how it impacts, like, if that's the modality you want to use for therapy. So there's 5 different communication stances. It's about being congruent, the placator, the blamer, the super reasonable, and the irrelevant. These stances acknowledge or minimize 3 realities: self, other, and context. So this is what the placator is. They minimize themselves, people-pleasing tendencies, needs less directive therapy methods. We're talking about someone who probably doesn't have very good boundaries, right? Just wants to appease people. The blamer minimizes others, needs to increase awareness of others' thoughts and feelings. Direct confrontation often strengthens therapeutic relationship. Maybe someone who plays the victim, right? Who tends to point the finger before acknowledging things. The super reasonable person minimizes self and others. Logic and rules reign supreme. Therapists must refer to context to gain validity. And then the irrelevant, which minimizes self, others, and context. No consistent grounding in themselves or other people. Must increase ability to recognize thoughts and feelings of self and others. So again, these are the different modalities, or I'm sorry, survival stances that people take in their approach to therapy that potentially can work best with them. Okay. So Virginia Satir is who we're going to talk about. I really like Satir. I think she did a lot. She has a lot of great interventions. She talks about different states of like a situation. So there's the status quo, introduction of a foreign element, chaos, which you kind of make chaos, integration of new possibilities, practice, the new status quo. A lot of this and what you're seeing with families is disrupting the pattern, disrupting the cycle. Because if we can disrupt the cycle, disrupt the pattern, we can hopefully evoke change. People definitely want to grow. I think oftentimes when people get into therapy, I'm not going to say all people, hopefully they're in a place, assuming it's not forced, hopefully they're in a place that they're wanting change, especially in a family situation. And so they're wanting to see good outcomes. All people possess the resource for positive growth. And this is like an ideology, right? Everything impacts and is impacted by everything else, which we see that especially in family, right? Like whatever is happening, let's say we have an IP, which oftentimes is called the identified patient. A lot of times a minor will come in and they're the IP, they're the problem, they're the one doing all the things wrong. Maybe some of you, that was you. So you have the IP, you have the identified patient, and this person, how they're behaving is impacting the whole family. Oftentimes parents just want to solve that problem, but what they don't realize is there's probably a dynamic around whatever it is that's going on. Sometimes a person draws a lot of attention to themselves because there's other things going on in the family, and that's to distract from that. We see this a lot in alcoholism, addiction, things of that nature. Everyone has their role in the family. One person affects all people, that kind of thing. So therapy is a process involving interaction between therapist and client, and each person is responsible for themselves. Okay, so taking responsibility, right? As the therapist, you are going to be warm, making contact, like probably before they even come into session, have empathy, conveying hope, which I think is super important in therapy, especially with working with couples and families. A lot of times people can feel very discouraged and deflated and defeated. And if we're conveying hope, that allows for us to say, you know, you can get through this, you can do this. And then establishing credibility. Okay. So we're talking about the role of the symptom in the system. So the symptom has a role in the family. For example, a child's exaggerating acting out may serve to reduce tension in the marriage. That's what I just talked about with the identified patient. Oftentimes, the person who's causing all the problems, like let's say the child, maybe they're distracting from an alcoholic. Maybe they're distracting from parents fighting all the time. Who knows? Maybe it has to do with something else that's going on in the family. If the therapist can understand how the symptom makes emotional sense, it will be easier to help find ways to interact successfully. Okay. So maybe in that scenario, right? Like if the therapist can see like, oh, like this kid is acting out in this way because the parents aren't getting along. If I can figure out how a way to address that with the child and the family, the parents, we might have a different outcome, right? So problematic family dynamics, power struggles, parental conflicts, lack of validation, lack of intimacy. So each person role in the family is assessed to understand the function of the problem. So there's the martyr, the victim or helpless one, the rescuer, the good child or parent, the bad child or parent. So this, we might do a timeline to better understand. So births, deaths, important events, important historical events, give both therapist and client insight into the context of the problem. Because usually things don't just happen overnight. Like, how did we get here? I think that's a popular thing people ask. So to be able to do that is huge. And even doing that with the clients allows them to see what they've been through. Sometimes I'll do a timeline with clients and they'll be like, whoa, it's been rough. And I'm like, yeah, it's been rough, especially people I've worked with for a long period of time. And I've known a lot of things that have happened in their life. I'm like, a lot's happened to you this year. Like, let's talk about it. Like, look at this, look at that, look at this. And they're just like, man, because we tend to minimize, right? Dismiss. And to be able to see that, be like, oh, this explains some things, right? Survival triad, child, mother, father, and quality of relationship between them. In this primary triad, a child learns how to be human, and the triad should serve as a nurturing system for the child. When the child is experiencing difficulty, the therapist considers how the nurturing function of these relationships can be improved. How can we have a more nurturing, loving, intimate relationship? This is something to be evaluated and taken a look at, and to give technique and challenge to create more of that experience for the child, right? So the iceberg, when we know of an iceberg, right, we saw the tip and then the Titanic ran into the ship, and it wasn't what you saw on the top, it was everything that was underneath. And so there are layers, and there's layers to people, there's layers to couples, there's layers to family. There's the thing that we see on the top that may have been what sent them over the edge, but there's so much underneath that creates the issues and the problems. There's behaviors, coping, feelings, perceptions, expectations, yearnings. This helps clients transform their feelings to make change, okay, getting through the layers. Self-worth and self-esteem. I'm not really a big fan of the word self-esteem. I'm like, who are we esteeming to be better than? We're not better than anybody else. We're just wanting to do our best. I liked it in one video I watched recently talking about kids and boys and being masculine. They're like, I want you to like to win, but I don't want you to boast about winning. I want you to, what was the right word? I'm like going blank right now, but I was talking about, it's not about being boastful. It's about wanting to do well and to win and to like competition, but not to be boastful about it, because that's like kind of an ugly quality, right? That's an inequality that we like to see. And so with self-esteem, I have a hard time with it, because it's like, what are we esteeming to be better than? Like, we all have a value and worth, and especially because of Christ, but we are not, Christ didn't want us to esteem to be better than others. He wanted us to esteem to be the best we could be because of what he's done for us, right? So anyways, consider aspects of the self that the client values. Self-compassion, better indicator of happiness than self-esteem. And as self-compassion and self-worth rise, they become more realistic and tolerant of their own weaknesses, right? Because we all have weaknesses, right? And things we could do better. Mind-body connection, how emotional issues may be manifesting in the body in either symbolically or functionally. And the way the body is used indicates a person's communication stance. So congruent communication, open and relaxed body posture, placating, timid and reserved, kind of goes back with those top things that we talked about at the beginning. Blaming, pointing, angry, stiff posture, super reasonable, cold and distant, and irrelevant, hyper distracted, like whatever. And you can see this unfold. It's like so amazing. You can see this unfold in a session in a room, in a therapy room, like just with how people are sitting on the sofa. It's so amazing. It's so cool. Like, you're like, I'm getting so much communication by the communication that's being demonstrated by nonverbal cues, right? So awesome. You can see it. You're like, really? It's like, yeah, it's like crazy. Anyways, so targeting and goal setting, right? The goal is transformation. We want people to change, achieve optimal realization of a person's full potential. We want people to be relationally focused. So we want congruent communication, which would be great. And individuals focus on self-actualization, which, you know, I have a little hard time with self-actualization. I'm like, who's actually self-actualized? I don't really know, but that is one of the goals. We're now going to be talking about Chapter 9, Symbolic, Experiential, and Internal Family Systems. This is Carl Whitaker, who is one of the ones who's like a grandfather of psychology, right? So therapy of the absurd, highlighting unconventional and playful wisdom, focused on emotional process and family structure, and adamant about balancing strong emotional confrontation with warmth. So we're trying to get... we're trying to figure out like the family and the dynamic and how it's all formed. So we're looking for the battle for structure, right? Should be won by the therapist who sets the boundaries, limits for therapy, sets the tone, has control of the room, right? It's very easy with families to not have control of the room because there's so many people, a lot of feelings. It's easy for people to take over with strong personalities. Battle for initiative needs to be won by the client. Therapists should never work harder than their clients. It is really frustrating in therapy to feel like you're working harder than the client. It's more exhausting. You can feel it. It's like, where are we going? It's a lot of that stuff. Okay. Therapy of the absurd, right? Known as therapy of the absurd, employs specific form of absurdity for specific purpose. So absurdity, that's a hard word, used to perturb the system. So, right, we're trying to mess it up a little bit. Compassionate and caring way. So sometimes caring means speaking a truth no one else will, but the therapist conveys caring behind brutality and honest comments. So we're speaking the truth in love, right? We're delivering honest information that might be really hard to hear, but doing it in a very kind and honest way. The therapeutic relationship. So the therapist's authentic use of self, right? So they're themselves. They strive to be authentic, doesn't follow professional pretenses or follow what is considered appropriate boundaries. Personal integrity, willingness to stand up for personal beliefs. Therapist responsibility pushes clients to accept full responsibility for their own lives. Stimulating mutual growth. The therapist and client grow together through authentic encounter. And sometimes the co-therapist can be in there, provides balance, support, and challenge. Sometimes a co-therapist could be used, especially in group, but it's a nice balance because it could be like one could be one type of personality, another type of personality. So as far as clicking and connecting, that could be helpful. That probably won't happen often for you, but it could happen. It probably would have happened often in like a inpatient type setting or rehab type setting because there's so many different clinicians working together. Authentic encounters relies on the in the moment authentic encounter. And therapists primarily on families' emotional system rather than the behavioral interaction. So we're really getting into the feeling of it, right? When sensing triangles, they focus on emotional exchange between parties rather than actions. Trial of labor, what it is, observing how the family responds to the therapist interventions, how it works, understand person's preferred family roles, values, and development family histories. Interactional patterns, two broad patterns, right? Structural organization of family and the emotional process and exchanges of the family. So the structural organization is like, what are the boundaries in the family? How clear are the boundaries? The role of flexibility, flexible alliances and coalitions. What's the generational gaps, gender role flexibility, generational mandates, and ghosts. The emotional process, it's like differentiation and individuation. We talk about that in boundaries. Tolerance of conflict, how they can handle it. Sexuality, conflict resolution and problem solving, loyalty and commitment, parental empathy, playfulness, creativity and humor, culture adaptation, and symbolic process. So as we're assessing families, we want to look at their strengths, how resourceful they are. Families viewed as highly resilient and resourceful, the therapist's focus is on activating these resources, using what they're good at, you know? So symptoms develop when dysfunctional structures and processes persist over time. Healthy families experience periods of dysfunction but do not become chronic, and persistent of dysfunction can occur over generations. Offspring feeling obligated to adhere to family myths and legacies or make up for prior losses. So this is what we talk about with generational curses, things that are habitual patterns that continue. You know, I don't want to marry anybody like you, but then I in turn marry someone exactly like you and do the same exact pattern that happened to me. Happens all the time. We have to be very intentional to break generational curses, do things differently, change. It's so easy to be like the people we don't want to be like. It's so easy. And everyone could say, I don't want to be like this person, but we can, because it's in us. It was our experiences. It was years of us being formed into being parents that got us to be where we are, right? And so it's a lot of undoing and a lot of self-work, you know, to kind of realize like, oh my gosh, this is what I'm doing. And it's like this person. I don't want to be like this person. It takes a level of humility too, right? And so it's for people to be able to recognize that and make those changes, it can change the trajectory for their family for generations to come in a positive way, right? So just some information there. Increase family cohesion, togetherness, promote personal growth, and expand the family's symbolic world. Okay. So creating confusion and disorganization. Confusion and disorganization breaks families out of rigid interaction patterns. So absurd comments, role reversals, appealing to universal principles at odds with families' beliefs. How it works. So the therapist uses present moment interactions and their own affect to promote change. Nothing worth learning can be taught. That's like an example of like a phrase. Immediacy is used to highlight and redirect structural change and confront dysfunctional patterns of belief. So redefine symptoms as ineffective efforts towards growth. For example, child's refusal to do homework is redefined as a fear of failing at a new level of challenge at school. So it changes the perception of what's going on, which might change a parent's compassion towards the struggle versus being frustrated by like maybe some level of stubbornness. And this could cause like, again, more empathy, more care, more nurturing, which might have a better outcome. Use of spontaneity, fun, play, build strong therapeutic relationship, allowing honest confrontation of clients. You know, the closer you feel to your client, not in an unethical or illegal way, but as far as like your therapeutic alliance, like, you know, you can speak truth to them. It's because of the rapport that's built. And so rapport building in this is very important. A use of humor and play often goes against common stereotypes about therapists and therapy, and playfulness helps reframe problems. I would say the more connected I feel with clients, the better we get from what they're doing, not because of necessarily anything I'm doing that's special, but because they feel more connected to get the work done. Okay. People don't know how to allow personal autonomy while also being intimately connected with others. And how it works. When clients are unreasonably demanding, therapists help sort out where spheres of influence should begin and end. If a parent is demanding a child play certain instrument or sport that the child clearly does not enjoy, the therapist will confront the family about where parenting ends and the child's autonomy begins. So where do I get to make these decisions, and where do you need to stop, right? Where am I allowed to be me, right? Especially if I'm so frustrated that they're not really enjoying it or liking it. Okay. Use of effective confrontation to interpret rigid patterns. Goals may be raise children's awareness when they don't know how they contribute to the problem, raise taboo subject that client and others have been avoiding, increase motivation to make changes when there is cognitive awareness but no change in action. Like they know what to do, but they're not doing it. When did you divorce your husband and marry your son? Those are some rough things to say, but truths, right? You're aware that you have abandoned the family to advance your career. You're aware. Yeah. It's hard things, but it gets it out there, right? Let's talk. Use how it works, augmenting despair and amplifying deviation. How it works, use with unrealistic, hopeless clients, exaggerates the client's symptoms so they can see how to proportion the negative assumptions are with reality, and can be done in a playful way or more direct and literal way, depending on what would be more useful to the client. Okay. So absurd fantasy ones, right? Invite client into absurd fantasy scenarios to shake them out of the pattern. Designed to increase families' flexibility and opens new behaviors, gets clients out of habits by playfully perturbing the symptoms so the new symbolic meanings, ideas, and perspectives can emerge. in a nutshell, the least you need to know. People have healthy core self that therapy aims to restore. Each person's inner life has multiple parts forming a system. Goal of therapy is to have self provide inner leadership to various parts. 3 basic roles parts assume: exiles, managers, and firefighters. And this is for internal family systems. So people have healthy core self that therapy aims to restore. Each person's inner life has multiple parts forming a system. And so, like I said, these things that I'm saying, each person has many different parts of themselves. We want to get them back to who they're supposed to be. We won't know necessarily at the beginning all the places they've derailed, but there's been some derailment. And so we're trying to help them get back to where they want to be, to restore maybe a better pattern, to get back on track, to find the path that leads them in a way that they feel like they can have success in their family. And so in this, we're hoping that the client can have some autonomy and then can continue to lead the family in this direction. Okay. That's all we're going to touch on right now. I hope you guys are having a great week. It's staying safe out there. Week 3 on our way.